Chapter 15 focuses on the special senses. So, in this chapter, we're basically going to walk through the five senses. So, this includes touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. Now, notice here under general senses, touch is a general sense, but along with touch comes things like pain and temperature and pressure and just orientation. So for example, if I'm not even looking and I hold my hand in the air, I know my hand is in the air. So that's sort of orientation of your body. That's all part of touch. That's a general sense. All of your other four senses are considered special senses. So that's going to include sight, taste, smell, and hearing. Now, also notice that under hearing, along with hearing comes balance. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the structures in the ear that really help with balance as well as hearing. So we're going to start just talking about the types of senses, which I've already alluded to a little bit. Again, a general sense. General senses are the sensation of touch and everything that goes along with that. So that includes pain, temperature, pressure, and limb position. Your special senses are everything else. So sight, sound, smell, and taste. Now, receptors for picking up these senses, we actually group these into 5 functional categories, and those are listed right here. So the first one are mechanoreceptors. This is anything that is activated by touch or pressure. So a mechanoreceptor is really picking up that general sense or that sense of touch. We also have chemoreceptors, and chemoreceptors are activated by chemicals. So this is going to include chemicals that are in the food, chemicals that are in air, or even chemical swings and shifts that are within your blood. So obviously chemicals in food, this is going to help pick up the sense of taste. Chemicals in the air help with smell. Okay. Our third type of receptor are thermoreceptors. These are going to be activated by temperature. Now remember, temperature is part of a general sense associated with touch. Photoreceptors, these are activated by light, so this is going to help pick up the sense of sight. And then lastly are nociceptors, and nociceptors are activated by pain. So again, pain, if you'll notice up here, is still part of that touch, that general sensation with touch. Okay, so those are the different receptors that can pick up these general and special senses in our bodies. So I want to talk first a little bit about our general sense, the sense of touch. One thing that we find that comes along with the sense of touch is something called adaptation. And this is that receptors that are picking up touch will stop generating impulses even when the stimulus is still present. That's adaptation. So some examples of this might be like those individuals who wear contact lenses. You know, when you first put a contact lens in your eye, it probably feels like a big boulder or just something foreign that's in there. But after you've worn contact lenses for a while, you know, some of you may have worn them now for multiple years, you don't even notice that they're in. You fall asleep with them in, you forget that they're in. And that's because all of those sensory receptors in your eye that are picking up that pressure and that general touch sensation, they have adapted. And they're no longer sending the impulse to your brain saying, oh, I got this thing in my eye, let's get it out. They've adapted. Another example might be wearing your wedding ring. I know when I first got engaged, I would twiddle my ring around on my finger and look at it, and I always noticed that it was there because it was new. Now I've been married for almost 17 years, and I actually notice it more when my ring is not on my finger than when it is on my finger. So again, those are just some examples of adaptation. Um, Now, not all receptors in your body will adapt, and that's important to remember. You don't want certain receptors to ever adapt. So, for example, like your muscle and your joint proprioceptors, these are basically picking up the awareness of either your muscle being contracted or your joint position. So, these help with body position. Again, I'll go back. Remember, body position, limb position. This is part of touch, general sense. Those don't adapt because you want to know always if a muscle is contracted. You always want to know what is the position of your joints. Are they flexed? Are they extended? So those do not adapt. Now that's all we're really going to mention on general senses. So the rest of this lecture is going to focus on our special senses. So these are sight, taste, smell, sound. And again, along with sound comes balance. And that's because of the structures in your ear. You have structures in your ear that help with hearing, and you will have some that help with equilibrium or balance. 70% of your sensory receptors are actually found in your eyes, and you have an area of your cerebral cortex that processes visual information. This is found in the occipital lobe of the cerebral cortex. Most of your eye is protected by a cushion of fat. Your eye is also housed in your orbital, which is a nice bony socket found within those facial bones. Now, some of the structures that we find in the eye that are nice and protective, things you may not even have thought of as serving a purpose, like the eyebrows. Your eyebrows are there because they actually help to shade your eyes from sunlight, but they also help to prevent sweat from dripping in your eye. Your eyelids, they're protecting the front of your eye. You know, if someone's ever thrown something at you, a lot of times you'll flinch, you'll close your eyes. And you're doing that instinctively to protect the front of your eye. Also, you blink. Your eyelid helps to spread the lacrimal fluid around your eye to keep it nice and moist. The conjunctiva of your eye. This is actually a transparent covering on your eye. It covers all of your eye, including the white of your eye, and it helps to lubricate your eye. Now we're going to come back to the conjunctiva and talk a little more about it. You've probably heard of pink eye or something called conjunctivitis. That's when you get an infection in the conjunctiva and it gets really red. The lacrimal apparatus, this secretes fluid onto your eye to keep it nice and moist. And the fluid, that lacrimal fluid that's being released onto your eye contains things like mucin. Mucin is basically mucus. But remember, mucus has antibodies, it has lysozyme in it. So it is there to help moisten your eye, but it's also there to help to protect your eye and keep bacteria out. And then finally, we have the extrinsic eye muscles. These are muscles that are situated all around the eye. You have 6 extrinsic eye muscles. And these muscles are there to help move your eye around. Now remember, we talked about in chapter 13 our cranial nerves. And remember, we have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. 3 of our cranial nerves go to our extrinsic eye muscles. So that should go to show you how important these eye muscles are for movement. This is a great picture of the surface anatomy of the eye. So things that you can see. So the white part of the eye over here is called the sclera. That's just the white part of the eye, and it is covered by a clear membrane called the conjunctiva. You can see this black dot in the middle. This is the pupil. Now the pupil is actually a hole. So it's not like an actual structure, it's a hole. And your pupil can get big, so that hole can get bigger. We call that dilating, or the pupil can get smaller. We call that constricting. The bigger your pupil gets, the more light it lets in so you can see. So a great example of that might be like when you walk into a dark room and you're really trying to see, the pupil's going to dilate and get really big and let as much light in as possible so you can see better. But this is why when you first walk into a dark room, it's really hard to see But then as your pupil dilates, it gets a little easier. You can start to make out shapes. When you're outside on a nice bright day, that pupil is going to be really small. You don't need the hole to be very big because you don't need to let much light into your eye. Okay, so the pupil's a hole. Now surrounding the pupil is this colored portion of the eye. This is called the iris. Now we also have a couple of other things that you can see. You can see things like the eyebrows, you can see the eyelashes as well. Again, these are just some protective structures on the eye. A couple of imbalances that are associated with the eyes, things like styes. A stye is an infected gland in the eyelid. This is not like a pimple, it can't be popped. The treatment for this is typically just a warm, wet compress, and it'll help to take the swelling down. Sometimes you may have to go and have it drained, and you may have to take some antibiotics for it. If it's really bad, a lot of times after they've drained it, they'll use an antibiotic wick. It basically looks like a candle wick. It is coated in antibiotics, and they'll shove it into that space that's been drained. Conjunctivitis, I mentioned this one. This is pink eye. This is a bacterial infection of the conjunctiva, that clear coating on top of that white sclera of the eye. And this is incredibly contagious. So little kids, when they get pink eye, a lot of times they can't go to school until they've been on antibiotics for a little while. And the antibiotics are usually a drop that you put in your eye to kill off those bacteria. How it is spread is if one child has pink eye and they rub their eyes and then they touch a pencil or a desk or a doorknob and another child touches that and rubs their eyes, it can very easily spread. Now watery eyes. Watery eyes typically can be caused by excess mucus. So your tear duct is found in the medial corner of the eye. This is going to help to drain that lacrimal fluid. It's going to drain it down into the nasal cavity. So this is why a lot of times when you cry, your nose runs. It's not snot. It's usually, well, it is. It's a mixture of snot, but it also has a lot of the lacrimal fluid, the tears coming down in there as well. Now, when you have a cold, so when you have excess mucus in the nose, sometimes that duct that drains your tears into your nose will get clogged with mucus, and so it might cause you to lose the tears over the side of the eye. And so this is watery eyes. So again, it's caused by a cold or nasal inflammation, and you just really, your tears aren't draining down into your nose, so they're pouring out of your eyes. I always tell my husband when I'm sick, I'll tell him I'm leaky, like everything is leaking. My nose is leaking, my eyes are leaking, it's all leaking. Now let's talk a little bit about the structure of your eye. The wall of your eye, it actually has 3 layers. So from the outside of the eye, we call that the fibrous layer. It's the tough layer on the outside. Under that is the vascular layer. And then there's the innermost layer. And then inside your eye, there is this internal cavity, and it is actually filled with fluid. Now remember, your entire body fluid, all the fluid put together, are called humors. Okay, so the fluid in your eye is called humors. So let's go through these 3 layers of the eye. So we're going to start with this outside fibrous layer. Again, it's the outermost layer. It's a really dense avascular connective tissue. So remember, avascular means not vascular, so it does not have a blood supply. And there's 2 regions. There's the sclera. This is the white part of your eye. This is going to help to protect your eye. It shapes your eyeball. It is what all of your eye muscles connect to, and it's actually continuous with the dura mater of the brain. Now, we did a sheep brain dissection, so you saw that dura mater. You saw how tough it was. You also saw the color of it. It was white, right? So this is continuous with the dura mater. And then we also have the cornea. The cornea is in the very front of the eye. It is transparent, so it is a clear layer. And the job of the cornea is to actually bend the light as it comes into the eye and through that pupil. Now, there are a lot of pain receptors on the cornea. And so this is why when you wear contact lenses, the cornea picks up the fact that there's pressure and there's something on your eye, and it sends that signal back to the brain. This is also why sometimes if people scratch their cornea, it's really painful because of all of those pain receptors. Now, again, your cornea and the sclera and the cornea do not have a blood supply. Remember, they are avascular. And so this is the number one organ transplant is the cornea, because there's very little chance of rejecting something that does not have a blood supply. So here is a great image. This is a sagittal cut through the eye, and what you can see is this outside part, very, very outside, a fibrous layer. That's our sclera. That's the white part of the eye. And then you can also see in the front here, this clear coating in the front, that is the cornea. Again, it has a lot of pain receptors, but it has no blood vessels. As light comes into the eye, that cornea bends the light as it moves into the eye and through the pupil, through that hole. This is the same thing. This is the human eye. So this is a sagittal cut through the human eye, and you can see the same thing. You can see the white of the eye, the sclera, around the outside. And then here in the front, you can see the cornea. Now, just under the fibrous layer is this vascular layer. There are three regions to this vascular layer. Again, think of the word vascular. It means it does have a blood supply. There's a choroid. The choroid sits just under the sclera, and it has a fabulous blood supply. In fact, it supplies blood to all the layers of your eye. And the choroid is a brown pigment, but it absorbs a lot of the light to prevent your light from scattering and to prevent visual confusion. So it makes sure that you're able to see things clearly. Now the choroid, when we dissect a cow eye, you'll notice that the choroid, to me, it has almost like a mother of pearl color to it. Now our models look brown, but on the actual eye, it has kind of this opal, really pretty color. Also within the vascular layer is the ciliary body. This is a ring of tissue that surrounds the lens of the eye. The ciliary body has a lot of smooth muscle in it to help control the shape of the lens. And so let's look at both the choroid and the ciliary body, then we'll come back. So the choroid is this structure here. It's this red structure. That's the choroid. Okay. And the ciliary body is this structure right here. Is the ciliary body. And you can see that there are these suspensory ligaments, these little white strings right here that are latching onto this structure. This is called the lens. And so the ciliary body on either side, it can contract and relax, which helps these suspensory ligaments pull or relax on the lens. So it can flatten that lens out or make it more bulbous. And the lens, just like this cornea, is helping to control and bend the shape of light as it moves in through your eye. And then lastly, in this vascular layer is the iris. And remember, this is the part that surrounds the pupil. It's the colored part of the eye. And again, the pupil is a hole. It's not actually like a physical structure. It is a hole that helps to regulate the amount of light coming in. So here in the bottom image, you can actually see this is a dilated pupil, so you can see how big the hole is here. And over here on the right is a constricted pupil. You can see how small it's gotten. So when you are looking at something that is really bright, you walk outside on a bright sunny day, those ciliary muscles are going to contract and your pupil will constrict and get really, really small. The same thing happens upon close vision. So if you're holding something really close to your face, your pupil will constrict. Now, when you are in dim light, So maybe you walk into a dark closet. Those muscles the radial muscles will contract and it'll cause the pupil to dilate and get big, like you can see on the left here. The same thing will happen when you are looking at something far away. The only other thing that can change your pupil size is actually your emotional state. So when something is appealing to you, your pupils will dilate, so you'll let in more light. Or if something requires a lot of problem-solving skills, maybe you're working on a really hard math problem, your pupils will dilate to let in more light. Now this is a great image because this is showing you the iris. So you can see the iris, you can see the muscles, that sphincter muscle within the iris. And you can see that when the muscle is relaxing, you can see how big that pupil gets. And then you can see here, as the pupil gets smaller and it constricts, you can see those muscles contracting. Now, deep inside the eye is a layer called the retina. And the retina is actually this sort of two-layered membrane. It's incredibly delicate. When we look at it on the cow eye, when we cut our eye open and the humor comes out, that fluid comes out, the retina automatically detaches, and it honestly looks like a piece of one-ply toilet paper that's wet. So it's very, very thin. Now, the job of the retina is it absorbs the light, and it contains neurons that pick up light information about sight, and they send that information back through the optic nerve. So here in this image, you can see the retina. The retina is this area right in here, and you can see it's two layers. And one of those layers contains photoreceptors. So the photoreceptors are picking up information about light and what you're looking at, and that information gets sent back to the brain through the optic nerve. Now, right where the optic nerve is, right here, right where it is exiting the eye, notice that you do not have any of these photoreceptors. Like here's photoreceptors, but right where that optic nerve leaves, you don't have any photoreceptors. That means that in that one little area, you're not picking up information about sight. And we call that area the blind spot. Now, you don't recognize that you have a blind spot because your brain actually fills in the information for you. However, in your lab PDF that you are working on for this week, you'll notice that you can identify the blind spot. So there are a couple of activities that you can do to actually find your blind spot in your eyes, and it's really cool when you do. Now, in your retina, there are two different kinds of photoreceptors. So now you can see over here in this image, we are looking in that area of the retina that contains those photoreceptors. There are rods and cones. So the rods, you can kind of see the rods are these purple structures here. They look like rods. And then the cones are the yellow structures, and they're shaped more like cones. So these are two very different kinds of photoreceptors in terms of the information that they're picking up. The rods, the purple ones, these are incredibly light sensitive, and that means that they do a really good job with night vision. Now, rods only contain a single pigment, so gray tones only. So typically, rods are picking up information that's in black and white. Someone who has what's called night blindness, so this might be someone who cannot drive at night because it's really hard for them to see, they actually have degeneration of the rods in their retina, and this is really common as we get older. Now the cones, those yellow ones that are shaped more like cones, these pick up information in bright light. So these do a really good job with bright light. And they actually need bright light to even be activated. They also have a lot of color, so they pick up that high resolution color vision. Now, someone who is colorblind, they lack one or more of the pigments found in the cones. Now, the retina, where we find those rods and cones, actually has a fabulous blood supply. The choroid is supplying the outer third part of the retina. So this is where the photoreceptors would be found. And then there's also a central artery and vein of the retina that supply the inner part of the retina. And that central artery and vein, they're going to come into and out of the eye at the same place that the optic nerve comes in and out. Okay, so we can see here, here's our blind spot. So we know that's where the optic nerve is exiting the eye. And you can see that central artery and vein coming in as well at this one point. And from there, they're going to radiate out and supply that blood. Now, someone who has problems with the vessels in the retina, those vessel changes can a lot of times indicate particular diseases. So examples might be diabetes or someone with high blood pressure. And so this is why a doctor will sometimes dilate your pupils so they can see in really well. They're actually looking at the retina. They're looking all the way through your eye at the retina, and they can even do some tests to look at the blood supply to the retina. Now, there is something called retinal detachment, and this is where the retina can separate from that choroid. This can lead to permanent blindness because of a lack of nutrients. Because remember, part of that choroid where the photoreceptors are get their nutrients from the choroid, not from the retina itself. So things that can cause the retina to detach might be things like a blow to the head, sudden changes in direction like bungee jumping. Now they can reattach the retina with a laser. They can do laser surgery. If you're interested in watching that surgery, you can actually find it on YouTube. There's tons of eye surgeries on YouTube that you can watch, and they're pretty fascinating. Now, if we look deep inside the eye, there are a lot of chambers in the eye. There's the posterior segment, which is this big part in the back. And then there's an anterior segment, which is up here in the front. It is in front of the iris and the pupil. It's between that and the cornea. Okay. So the posterior segment, this contains something called vitreous humor. The term vitreous means jelly-like, and humor is just fluid. And when you dissect the cow eye, you're going to see that. It looks like a little piece of jello that comes out. And the job of this vitreous humor is to help transmit the light all the way back to the retina, to that yellow lining back here. It also helps to keep pressure in the back of your eye. So it actually holds the retina in place. This forms in an embryo and it lasts a lifetime. So this is a reason why if you were to get a piercing wound in your eye, so maybe like a toothpick or something jams into your eye, you never want to pull it out because you will leak out this vitreous humor from your eye and you'll lose pressure in your eye and your retina can detach. So instead, you always want to leave it in until you can get to the doctor, and that way they can make sure that you don't lose your vision. Now the anterior segment, pay attention to the word anterior. This is in the front. This contains aqueous humor. Aqueous just means watery. This is a more watery fluid. This is formed by the capillaries. It's formed by those little vessels. It is formed continuously from blood filtrate. It supplies a lot of nutrients and oxygen to the front of your eye, so to the lens and to the cornea. Now, glaucoma, this is a condition where that aqueous humor in that anterior segment is being created, but it's not draining. And this actually causes an increase in pressure. It causes an increase in pressure in the front of the eye, but it'll also start pushing on the back of the eye, and that can lead to blindness. So to do a glaucoma test, when you go for an eye test, this is where they make you hold your eye open, and they do that puff of air on your eye, what they're looking at is to see how far in your cornea depresses with a puff of air. So they can measure that and assess what the pressure is in that anterior segment. Now, if somebody has glaucoma, they can give drops that either help to reduce the amount of aqueous humor you're making, or they can also help with the draining of that fluid. So again, where we're looking at in this anterior segment is right up here, okay? So it is in front of the iris and the pupil and the lens and behind this clear cornea. So there's a fluid in here, that aqueous humor. Now I want to talk about the lens of the eye. We've mentioned it multiple times. The lens, and you notice this in the cow eye dissection, the lens feels like a little pebble. It is really hard. It's a biconvex, so it's shaped like this, convex and convex on both sides. It is transparent. It is flexible, so it can change shape. It can get thinner or fatter, but it does not have a blood supply. And it changes shape so it can really focus light on the retina. Now, as you get older, the lens gets a little more dense. It also changes shape a little bit, and it gets less elastic, so it doesn't change shape as well. We can't make it flatter. We can't make it beefier as well. And so this is why as we age, a lot of times we have to start wearing glasses, like reading glasses. Now, there is a condition called cataracts. This is when we get some deposits on that lens. Normally it should be crystal clear, like think of a lens in a pair of glasses. And if it starts to get cloudy, it makes seeing really difficult. It's like looking through a dirty pair of glasses. And things that can cause cataracts might be things like just old age as you get older, diabetes, smoking, being exposed to sunlight all the time without wearing sunglasses or eye protection. Sometimes cataracts can be congenital, but you get this buildup on the lens. And typically with cataracts, the lens has to be replaced surgically. And I am going to show you a little video of that. So they are going in around the cornea, and they created a little incision. They're not going to cut all the way around the cornea. They're just going to do some little incisions. And they've dilated the pupil, so you can see you're looking straight through the pupil. You're looking all the way back at the retina here. They've just added some fluid in there just to give themselves some space to work. And they're doing everything through that little hole. Now you're looking through the pupil, you are looking at the lens here. So they are going to take off the film of the lens. Again, everything's being done under the clear cornea. So they're removing that clear coating off the lens. And now they are going in with this ultrasonic probe. You can see everywhere it touches, it's breaking the lens apart. And now they're going in with, it's like a little vacuum, and they're going to vacuum out the pieces of this lens as they work. You can see they're breaking the lens and vacuuming that out. Basically, they are going to divide that lens into two pieces to make it more manageable. You can see they've kind of cut right down the middle of it. So the patient is awake during this procedure. They don't feel anything. They're given numbing drops on the eye. From patients who've had this surgery, it's a quick surgery. It takes 10 minutes. Oh, you can see they're breaking that lens into two pieces here. They really don't see anything because their pupil's so dilated. It just looks very bright. There's a big light shining so that the surgeon can see what they're doing. And what most patients say is the worst part is that the eye gets dry. You can see there are some retractors up here holding the eyelids open. So they say the worst part is just the eye. You want to blink, but you can't. There you go. Now you see that lens is really getting sucked up. There's something so fascinating about this. There we go. It's almost gone. Okay, so it's cleaned out. That lens that's full of cataract and debris is now gone. And so now they're going to come in and they're going to put in a synthetic lens. The synthetic lens is going to be wrapped in a tube, and they're going to squeeze that lens out into the eye. So they're adding some fluid in there, making sure they've got everything out that they need to have out. They're going to add a little fluid in there to build that pressure back up. And how they used to do this, here's the lens coming in. There it is. It was twisted up, kind of folded up. And now you can see how clear it is. It looks like the lens in a pair of glasses. And they're just going to position it. Those are just air bubbles, those little bubbles in there. And that is it. How they used to do this surgery is they used to cut all the way around the cornea, take the cornea off and do this procedure. But then they'd have to stitch the cornea back on the eye. And so with this procedure, this is called phacoemulsification. They do it all through that tiny little incision. No stitches are necessary. Usually after the procedure, they'll send you home with an Ambien because the best Band-Aid for your eye is your eyelid. So they just want you to keep your eyes closed, take a nice nap, and that's it. So they're just going to spend some time positioning here this lens. We'll add a little more fluid. And that is it. Very neat. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about, now that we know all the parts and pieces of the eye, let's walk through how someone can see and what's happening in order for you to see. So as light comes into your eye, it is going to move. Let's use an image here. We'll go back to this one. Light's going to come into your eye. And the first thing it's going to pass through is the cornea. From there, it's going to move through this anterior segment filled with aqueous humor. Then it's going to move through the pupil, through the lens, through this posterior segment with vitreous humor, and then it's going to hit the retina. And what we want is when the light hits the retina, we want it to hit the retina at a focal point. So we want it to be in focus when it hits the retina. So again, light's going to go through the cornea, through that anterior segment filled with aqueous humor, through the pupil, which is just a hole, and then through that lens, through the posterior segment with vitreous humor, and then into the retina. Now the light as it's moving through there is refracted 3 times. That word refracted just means bent. So the light gets bent 3 times along that pathway. The first time is in the cornea. When it goes through the cornea, it bends the light. And then when it enters the lens, the light gets bent. And when it leaves the lens, the light gets bent. Most of the bending happens in the cornea, but the lens can change shape and really help focus that light as well. So this is an image showing you what we want the light to do when it hits the retina. So again, it's going to come in through this cornea and it's going to bend a little bit. You can see all these lines are the light coming in. And then it's going to hit this lens and it's going to bend on the way in and out of the lens. And that light, as it continues to travel, notice it's converging at a focal point right on that retina. So your eyes are actually best adapted for looking at things that are farther than 20 feet away. So this is focusing on things that are distant vision. There's a point we call the far point of vision, and this is the distance beyond which no change in the shape of the lens is needed for focusing. You're still going to get a nice focal point when that light hits the retina. Now, when you're looking at something that's up close, your eyes are actually going to converge to make that possible. So when you're looking at something up close, your eyes have to make a lot of adjustments. So one thing that has to happen is something called accommodation. When you look at something up close, your lens has to change shape so that the light focuses on the retina, like I showed you. Now, as you get older, your lens is less stretchy. It doesn't change shape as well, and this is called presbyopia. This usually happens as you get a little bit older, around the age of 50 or so. This is why a lot of times you'll have to start wearing reading glasses. Another thing that will happen when you look at something up close is constriction. Your pupils will constrict, and this is just to help prevent divergent light rays from coming into your eyes so that you can see better. And then lastly is convergence. Your eyes will actually converge. They'll rotate inward. We call that adduction. So they'll move in so that you can see better. Now, this is also why when you look at something up close and your eyes converge, sometimes you'll get like a reading headache or a stress headache, and that's usually right in between your eyes. Like if you pinch the bridge of your nose, that's where it hurts, like where your glasses sit. And the reason is because you are straining those muscles on the inside of your eyes because of convergence. So our eyes are really better adapted for looking at things far away, not looking at things up close. Now, there are some problems as we age, and problems with light refracting so that it does hit a focal point on the retina. One of them is called myopia. Another term for myopia is nearsightedness. Now, think of that word nearsighted. It means that you can see things up close, but you can't see things far away. And so typically what will happen, and I'll show you a picture of this. Okay, so this is myopia on the image on the top. This is showing you the light coming into the eye. Again, it's going to be bent at the cornea as it enters the lens and as it leaves the lens. But it's focusing here in front of the retina. So by the time it actually hits the retina, it's out of focus again. I always think of a projector. If you've ever run a projector so that it's hitting a wall or a screen, you kind of have to play with that focus knob. You have to turn it, and the movie will go in and out of focus. It's kind of what's happening. We want it to focus on the retina, and in myopia, you can see it's focusing in front of the retina. And so someone with myopia, a lot of times they'll have to wear corrective lenses, which bend the light so that it is hitting the retina at a focal point. There's also a condition called hyperopia. This is farsightedness. So again, think of the word farsightedness. You can see things far away, but you can't see things up close. And in hyperopia, the focal point is behind the retina. So here's an image of hyperopia. Again, the light's going to come in, it's going to go through the cornea, it's going to bend going through the lens and coming out of the lens. And you can see when it hits the retina, it's not quite in focus yet. It's focusing way back here behind the retina. So again, corrective lenses will fix that so that it focuses when it hits the retina. Now, there's also a condition called astigmatism, and this is unequal curves in different parts of the cornea or the lens. So it used to be that people who had astigmatism on the cornea could not wear contact lenses because they wouldn't fit. But now we do have some contact lenses specifically for people with astigmatism. And so these can be corrected with astigmatism can even be corrected with laser surgery.